Hi there, everybody. My name is Kate, and welcome to my channel, Trinergy Awakens Naturally. So I'm out hiking, which is what I do a whole lot to get my spiritual downloads and just nourish my soul. And Mother Nature was so kind, is so kind, and is gifting me with a message from Divine, and I wanted to share that with you. First of all, for anybody who is wondering, one forest kind of looks like another. They don't to me. This is Terrial Reservoir, Lost Wilderness, in Colorado. Yeah, this is a spot I haven't been here yet. It's not where I thought I was going, and Divine is always so kind and saying, yeah, we're gonna change your mind. So anyway, the message that I got as I was coming up here, hiking, literally just hiking, and it was coming through so loud and clear to me that the way that we learn, we can choose to be the harsh teacher if we had one. We can choose to burn under that and, become one, or we can, learn under a harsh learner and then learn how to be a kinder, gentler, firm teacher with boundaries, but kindness, and not just shaming the crap out of people in what they don't already know. And the image that came to me, the metaphor and the metaphysical understanding that came to me, is that it is a crossroad always in our lives, in our minds, in our soul, our heart, etc., and in our programming to change our design if we choose to. So for instance, if we were taught how to swim, for those of us that know how to swim, and I know there are people who do not, and but you get the teaching if you'd like to go with me, that if we learned how to swim by somebody throwing us into a lake or the ocean or a swimming pool or something like that, I'm letting my dog Hondo off leash, which is not something he's usually allowed to do. We're testing our boundaries, and so far he's been able to walk, without me holding his leash pretty well. So we're going to see what kind of, teacher I've been with him to guide him and mold him. So excuse me, as I might have to guide him and mold him a little more directly. He looks like he's just hunting a super sweet spot to sit in the shade, so I'm going to let him do his thing without me monitoring every second of his life, Another teaching is, you don't have to be up in everybody's grill all the time. 222, it's totally divine. So anyway, if we were thrown into a pool, and the teacher that we had was a very kind, loving, I can't imagine this, but was a very kind and loving teacher who, the rest of the time was, very kind and all of that, and they only tossed us into a pool, to learn how to swim in that very cruel way, we might be able to come out of that and say, what the hell was that one time that you did that? You taught me how to swim in a very, oh my God kind of way, and that we do learn how to swim when we're tossed into water. Our inclination is not dying. Most humans, instinctively, we are biologically given that. We're just not all biologically given all of the wherewithal and the physicality to actually make that happen. However, we all have our survival instinct. It's a lizard response, a reptilian. I don't mean the alien. I mean, like, that's a primitive response of fight or flight. I don't want to die. I'm going to do whatever I can to keep that from happening. And so we paddle, we swallow, we anti-drown as much as we can to the, best of our capability. And, learning that way we definitely can learn that way. And some teachers, believe that throwing a kid in the pool is the best way to do that they'll figure it out, Nobody ever drowns except for those that do. However, that is how some of us learn. And if we go back to the idea that if that was the way that we learned, and that person who tossed us in, a parent, for instance, tossed us in and taught us how to swim like that, and that was the only kind of cruel thing they did, not kind of cruel, it's very cruel, but if that's the only kind of cruel thing overall in the midst of the really good stuff, if that was the cruelty they exhibited was just there, then we can, recover from that more easily and say, okay, that was a little weird. I shouldn't have done it like that, However, I did learn how to swim, or I learned how to be never around water safely, whichever way, we go with that little crossroads. However, if we had somebody who threw us in a pool and they were also cruel in other areas of our life, that we were learning life by being thrown into the middle of it, people have to know the cruelty. Kids need to grow up. They don't believe in Santa Claus, what the hell, and we're forced to really grow up fast and understand that there is no childhood. There is no such thing. Peter Pan doesn't exist. It's a movie, squash, squash, squash. Then we're thrown into, pools to learn how to swim routinely every day. That is Hondo. I have no idea what he's howling for. There's elk in the area, so maybe he smells elk, which is great that they smell us and they're never coming near us. So anyway, excuse me, I got all tied up with what he was doing and distracted, but he found his spot. He's totally happy. He's chewing on a branch, and he's having his moment. So and he's perfectly happy not being here right next to me, under mommy's knee, next to her skirt or something, and I'm cool with that. Please be a little more independent and trustworthy while you're doing that. So we both get an A+. So anyway, if we've learned the cruelty of life, and that somebody taught us how to live by exposing us to the brutality of life, the Serengeti is a brutal place. However, it doesn't have to be that brutal for human beings. We choose to be that brutal, and in the natural world on the Serengeti, they don't see that as brutality. They see that as, I'm going to get some dinner for the family. However, we replicate that and call that real life. And so we oftentimes get thrown into pools of existence where you got to learn how to swim, baby, make that happen. And so the crossroad for us becomes, in the future, am I going to be that kind of a teacher, or am I going to learn from that experience not only how to swim perhaps, or anti-drown and never get around water again safely because it's too terrifying for me, that am I going to learn how, is that my only teaching, or am I also willing to be a teacher to other people, because perhaps that experience was so awful for me that I don't ever want anybody to grow up believing that starting another generation and learning how to swim under those conditions is appropriate, healthy, good, or fun, or a correct way to do that. We have swimming instructors, lots of them. We know how to do this in a kind and loving way. And excuse me, if we choose to just keep on teaching the way that we were learned, we're teaching to be the cruelty of the cruelest thing that we've ever taught to be, or taught a way to have to survive, somebody being that way with us. And so our choice, the crossroads that we are always in to decide for ourselves, friend, is, am I going to be the kind of person that doesn't learn how to be a swim instructor, metaphysically, metaphorically, please, I'm not talking real life, unless you are a swim instructor, thank you for those of us that were thrown into pools and then had our head dunked and had to barely survive. And we appreciate, swim lessons, appropriate ones that don't hurt and nearly kill us. We appreciate life lessons like that a whole lot. Most of us do. However, we've oftentimes come from places where, our swim instructor, our parent, our caregiver, our early providers, he's investigating other areas. He's in the realm of okay. We come from providers who were teaching us, how to grow up way too fast because somebody taught them, and they didn't change their mind. They didn't decide that that was a terrible way to live. They never do any self-reflection, or they don't do anything to change their patterning because they don't see the problem. They see the world as a cruel kind of place, dog eat dog. And again, the Serengeti, that's how that rolls, is the natural world can be pretty violent to observe. However, they don't have the niceties 808 and the culture, if you will, the same way we do. However, it's a clean kill when they do. They don't do anything gratuitously. The natural world does not imbalance itself willingly. That's the human being that does that to the natural world and tries to collaborate and co-create in a way that is leaving imbalance everywhere, particularly within our own species. We exact a dog-eat-dog mentality because we were dealt with in a dog-eat-dog mentality, or we grew up to believe that that's what it would take. And the cruelty that is executed upon children to, grow up and learn the reality of life. Children don't need to know the reality and the harshness of life any faster, any harder, any longer, or any wronger than in a schoolyard, in a playground where, if it wasn't already riddled with violence, and I'm talking, this stuff of 2025, that back in the day when it used to be that you just had, the neighborhood bully who was going to try and, get their game on and, find themselves and find their strength and find their, position of whatever that is. It is enough for a child to have to learn the cruelties of losing a pet, or losing a grandparent, or dealing with a bully, or having to work really hard on a project that they do not get the grade that they were hoping for, or they don't make the team that they had tried so hard to be a part of, or whatever it is. The complexities and the cruelties of life They don't have to be that complex, and they certainly don't have to be cruel, beyond what regular living in a healthy environment would be for a child to grow up and understand. And learning how to swim, kindly, gently, and working through the terrorized children that don't automatically respond to water, very well, rather than just throw them in or, not account for their fear. You don't have to grow, monster people who have, courage beyond their fear point by throwing them into situations and not giving them a chance to speak to their fear and let that fear speak to me. That is an educated teacher. That's the kind of swim instructor that I wish I had had and didn't have. And that's the kind of swim instructor that I care to be, because we're swimming around in emotions constantly that we've been thrown into places as we've grown up. We've been thrown into, deep pools of just disaster and emotion and violence and oh my God, and had to learn how to swim in that. And it was nothing more, we weren't Mark Spritz, or isn't he the swimmer? If he's not, he might be the diver. He knows how to swim. Whoever our Olympic swimmers are, surviving a thrown in the lake experience doesn't make us an Olympic swimmer unless we chose to get over the butthurt and the cruelty of how we learned how to, survive that event and then hone that skill. However, we don't learn how to become a master something by being thrown into disaster without picking up and figuring out how we're going to make the best out of that. And so the idea of propagating some 11-11, divine, I love it. If we do not pick up and learn how to move beyond the teaching method of cruelty and domination and overcoming our fear, I want my fear to speak to me, because it was instilled early that I needed to have a whole bunch just to survive the cruelty of the world, the cruelty of my world. Nobody was letting me in on the beauty of the world that could be had. They were busy making my life ultra bad and scary. And I learned the patterning of what fear response was, to live in a heightened state of awareness constantly. And so everywhere I was the pool of emotion of me, trying to navigate the violence everywhere around me and believing that that was the reality of the world. And sadly, taking that mentality into adulthood and creating and co-creating and recreating that is just the pattern that is breaking down now. Thank you, God, that it is. It's breaking down now. However, we still have people super confused about what kind of teacher, 1212, would you like to be? Would you like to be the cruel teacher, like the one that taught me? Or would I like to be the teacher who understands the fear in other people, who's willing to help that fear speak to me, to guide them, to guide me, when it's mine, to guide me, and not allow anybody else's mind or their fear or their, Serengeti mentality of dog eat dog, not allow that fear to influence mine. I let my fear inform me, because that's exactly what it's there to do for me. It's not meant to keep me in a heightened state of, oh my God, I never get a rest from the cortisol, the adrenaline, and all the hormones that, make me very, very, ill most of the time. I don't ever get a chance to rest and recover because my body's in a heightened state of alert and awareness, and my body at rest time is trying to just calm down and actually sleep rather than rest and repair. We need that time to be in rest and repair, because we go, in our mode when we do, and when we burst constantly in the, oh my God, I'm trying to survive, learning how to swim in brand new situations, learning them again and again and again in this cyclical pattern that is so toxic, it's so unhealthy, and it builds resentment that we don't even know we have. So anyway, Hondo's doing beautifully. I had to get on his hind end. I don't remember what he did. But we had a very harsh day yesterday where he and I had to have a very serious talk about, oh no, sir, that is absolutely a no-go. And he was super, with me. However, that's one of the ways that's most valuable to teach him, and that he's taught me, is that he doesn't need that harsh thing. He's very much a neurodivergent dog. I love it, and I understand him from that perspective, that harsh tone, etc. However, he needs very clear boundaries. And when he just was feeling his 2.5-year-old self, almost 3, I think I'll just go do that by me. That, oh no, you don't. Absolutely not. You may not do that. That's a critical fail on that particular thing, was that he needed to understand that's an absolute NFW, dude. You may not do that. That will get you hurt. And he doesn't need to understand all of the background noise in my head about why. He just needs to understand, when I tell you no, I mean no. Absolutely not. And you got to stop right where you are and drop, right where you are with a sit, and park. And going to expect to do that. And he did not. He chose to test me about how far I was going to run up on him, how fast I was going to come to him, and make sure he understood that's a no-go. And it terrified the snot right out of him. However, that's a healthy fear that I want my dog to have enough respect for me that I'm going to tear your hiney up if I see you doing something that's going to get you hurt. You can be sure I'd rather hurt your little feelings and have you be butthurt with me and not speak to me, for a few hours, than to not be able to come out today and trust him, because he knows that ultimately I don't scream at him every day. The scream gets lost in the noise, Whenever we hear constant screaming, how do you know what to listen to? You just kind of tune out all the white, freaking annoying ass noise. And so today I'm trusting him to be off the leash because he understands me better about what the hell that was yesterday, and I had no idea we were going to do this today. However, that's the divine setting it up and putting it into line. So time to move on, because he has been very patient and diligent, and I'm ready to go and find out what the rest of this trail is looking like. So I hope that you are well no matter what part of the day you're in, and I hope that you can get in your skin and find your divine, because your divine is so beautiful, it's so gorgeous, and it's absolutely fine, and it guides you every single time to learn how to be that teacher. Do I want to be the harsh teacher of me that throws me into these situations very harshly and critically, or do I want to allow myself to be the kind and gentle teacher who doesn't bring out that harsh stuff, on self that I'm going to be very kind and allow my fear to inform me. My fear was informing him of, you need to be afraid and see what it is that you're doing. So and he's a dog, he doesn't see where I can see, and so sometimes I have to do that without his full permission. However, it does help bring a new level of respect for him and for me. So take care of yourself, get into that divine, absolutely fine. Take care, my beautiful friends, and I'll see you again next time. Bye bye. Bye bye.